Daniel Ellsberg, thank you so much for being with me. It's just an honor to have a chance to speak with you.
An honor to be with you. And I was just looking over your platform, by the way, as a presidential candidate, and I agree with every point on it. So you're my candidate there.
Thank you. A great honor to hear you say that. I appreciate it. You know, your very public support for Julian Assange has done a lot to make people far more aware, not only of the issue, but also the importance of the issue. Because when you say to people, well, even Daniel Ellsberg says it's a lot like the Pentagon Papers and what he went through, a lot of people go, oh, okay, now I get it. On the other hand, there are a lot of people who weren't born then or are too, were too young at the time to remember. Now, I'm old enough that I remember very well 1971. I remember the release of the Pentagon Papers. I remember the whole drama about it. I remember your heroism. And I remember the fact that at that time, the courts came down on your side, as it were. Would you please, in your words, before we talk about Julian, especially now that we have just had the 50th anniversary of the release of the Pentagon Papers, just coincidentally, how do you look back at all of that now? And I certainly want to hear how you see that in its similarity to Julian Assange's case. But how do you look at the Pentagon Papers, the release of all that now, both in terms of what you experienced at the time and your own historical perspective?
Well, I put out 7,000 pages of top secret material to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I didn't give all of that to the newspapers, actually. I withheld part of that having to do with negotiations because I didn't want them to use that release of the negotiations as an excuse for breaking off negotiations, which really weren't real negotiations by Nixon at that time. They were ultimatums. They were sort of accept our terms or we'll blow you off the map. Not real negotiations. But I did withhold those. I gave about 4,000 pages or so forth to the New York Times, and when they were enjoined for the first time in our history, prevented from publishing a prior restraint, I gave them to the Washington Post. And then when they were enjoined to eventually 17 other newspapers, 2 more were enjoined. The First Amendment is often thought of, freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion, by the way, is often thought of as intended in particular to avoid prior restraint. In other words, to keep any publisher from publishing anything. And Julian Assange, to go right to the present, is not a source, as I was, of information. He was a publisher. Indicting him, as he is now indicted, is equivalent to having indicted the New York Times back in 1971, who published and the 18 other newspapers who published. Now, actually, although it's little known, Nixon did have that in mind. He had a Boston grand jury operating to indict Neil Sheehan, Hedrick Smith, and the New York Times itself. And that was dropped largely. We don't really know entirely why that grand jury was dropped. So that would have provided a precedent for Julian Assange's indictment. As it is, there is no precedent. No other publisher has ever actually been indicted. And that would pretty much finish the First Amendment if he were convicted and that were upheld, for publishing material that the public had a need to know, that was classified, but that clearly did not require protection from any foreign enemy or ally or anybody else, anyone except the American public. It was most classified material is protected from the American voters, from the American public, from the American Congress, not from any foreign enemy. In fact, a great deal of it involves threats, as Nixon was making at that very time to North Vietnam, that are very well known to the recipient of the threat. North Vietnam at that time, their allies, Russia and China, knew of those threats. It was only the American public from whom that was very secret, because they would have objected in 1969 and 70 and 71 to threats and commitments and readiness to enlarging the Vietnam War. Now, I knew about those threats from people in the administration who knew of them. I didn't, unfortunately, have documents on those. They didn't give them to me. Some of them could have, but they didn't give them to anyone. And I think they could have very well have averted the actual escalation of the war, which did take place under Nixon. I didn't succeed in that because I didn't have the documents. All I had were documents that went up, the Pentagon Papers, so-called, up to 1968, before Nixon actually came into office. And they showed a pattern of lying to the American people and threatening escalations and carrying out those secret escalations from 1945. It started till 1968, 23 years, 4 presidents, Democrat and Republican. I wanted to suggest that a 5th president, Nixon, was doing the same. And without documents, I failed. I didn't succeed in convincing people that this president, whether they voted for him or not, was still lying and was still carrying on the war. Now, the war was going on. That wasn't a secret. How do they explain that it took a man that they elected to end the war, Nixon, and who said he was ending the war falsely? The war went on for 6 years after 69. I don't think they have an explanation for that. It shows a kind of incuriosity by reporters, historians, last month of the 50th anniversary, because I've seen over and over again what the Pentagon Papers supposedly showed, and I disagree with what they supposedly showed. And that's kind of dismaying, actually, to feel that somehow the point never did get across. But I was indicted, and I faced the 115 years possible sentence. Assange is now facing 175 possible years, kind of inflation over the years. But for each of us, that would have been a life sentence. And really, it was kind of a miracle that I'm not still in prison.
And what happened to ruin the government's case against you?
Well, the miracle was not only, this was not so much of a miracle, individual elements, Nixon's crimes against me to keep me from telling what he was doing, what he was threatening, which he feared, which he knew that I knew. I told Kissinger, his assistant, what his policy was in privacy in San Clemente. I leaked that into the White House to let them know that I knew what was going on. But did I have documents to prove it? That's what they feared. I didn't, unfortunately. And but they had reason. They were not paranoid in thinking that people who did know and who had left the government over the invasion of Cambodia might have given me documents. And so to keep me from revealing those, they burglarized with the use of CIA so-called assets, agents of the CIA, to burglarize my former psychoanalyst office, not to smear me, as is almost always said, but to threaten to smear me, to blackmail me into keeping quiet. Putting the word out wouldn't make any difference one way or another. But if it was information in that doctor's office that I didn't want out, which was imaginable, I wouldn't say there was anything there that would have kept me from going on, but it's reasonable of them to think that was the place to look for embarrassing things about my personal life that they could threaten me with revealing if I kept on putting out information as I was. And then they did a psychological profile of me to see how I could be manipulated. The CIA operation, which was against their charter. They'd done many such profiles against foreigners. They were not supposed to do it against Americans, but I was the first they did that against. They attempted to incapacitate me totally, or murder me, or assault me. It's not clear entirely which, but certainly to stop me from talking on May 3rd, 1972, just days before they mined Haiphong and began B-52 bombing of North Vietnam, which I'd been predicting. And they wanted to keep me from showing that had been on the cards, on the table since 1969. Anyway, these threats, these crimes, I think would have been done by pretty much any other president. They're always put down to Nixon's peculiar paranoia and impulsiveness and so forth. Any president who wanted me to shut up, I think, would have taken those actions, illegal as they were. And by the way, since 9/11, they're not all illegal. They've been legalized, going into a doctor's office, using CIA assets in various terms. Too bad.
Is that because of the Patriot Act?
It's about 9/11. It's about, since then, the Patriot Act. Yes, did you say that? Mm-hmm. Yes, it is the Patriot Act and some of the other acts they've had.
Yeah.
So,
well, those were.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, those were pretty inept CIA operatives.
Well, these were the same guys that they were sending. They were the same guys, literally, that they'd sent to assassinate Castro. So he died a natural death, and I haven't yet.
Well, that's, of course, the basis of the Watergate scandal, and history has played itself out in so many significant ways. Now, you talk about the similarities and the parallels between your case and the Assange case, but I want to begin with the parallel between why the government was so intent on silencing you and why the government is so intent on silencing Assange. What you both revealed, what you revealed about the decision making regarding the Vietnam War, and what Assange revealed about the occurrences during the Iraq War. So this all has to do with military secrecy, correct? The government trying to keep the American people from knowing. And that's another point that you made very interestingly a few minutes ago, and that I've heard you say before. They classify these documents, which theoretically should be because it would be a threat to our national security if other nations were to know. But what in both cases the military and the U.S. government is afraid of is the American people knowing. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about the military secrecy that was so operative in the 70s, in your case, and how you see it as different or how you see it as the same with what's happening with Julian Assange.
Look, let me give you, go right to what Julian Assange did reveal, having been given it and what he's indicted for now, having had it given to him by Chelsea Manning, earlier at that time, Bradley Manning. And Chelsea gave him a video which he labeled collateral murder, criticized for calling it that, its provocative name, showing American helicopter gun crew mowing down with machine gun, I guess 50 caliber machine guns, I think, 17 Iraqi civilian clothes, 2 of them being Reuters journalists, and not clear that any of them had anything to do with the Iraqi insurgents. One of them may have been carrying a gun. That was pretty frequent in Baghdad for self-protection at that point. But anyway, 17 civilians being mowed down, and one of them trying to escape, pursuing him, shooting him. It was murder. I say, as a former battalion operations officer, training officer, who was taught the laws of war briefly. We didn't spend a lot of time on them, but enough to know that deliberately killing civilians is murder, even in wartime.
It's a war crime.
So, okay, he showed this then. By the way, a civilian car comes on the scene with 2 children in the front seat. The driver trying to help the wounded men, still wounded, most of them dead, on the ground. And that being fired at then, with the children being injured, at least one of the children being injured. Okay, collateral murder then, which is a war crime. None of the people being tried or prosecuted for that, even though others at the time testified, this is an everyday occurrence. This wasn't anything unusual. It was a revelation to the American public of what the war looked like, what was actually happening over there. Next, big thing, Chelsea Manning revealed hundreds of cases, literally hundreds of cases, of Iraqis that we had captured being turned over to Iraqi soldiers who we knew would torture them and did torture them. Now, that's a crime, and to task them over, knowing, and not to investigate, not to prosecute, is as much of a crime in international law and domestic law as torturing them ourselves. And that was under Obama, actually, showing that it started earlier, but it continued under Obama. Now, in addition to that, by the way, what she put out was 20,000 more people, civilians killed, than anybody had yet calculated.
Official estimates. Mm-hmm.
This is in Iraq. Okay, so now the people killed knew who killed them, mostly from the air by American planes. The other side didn't operate air. Somebody killed from the air, killed by Americans. The people being tortured knew they were being tortured, and their family knew they were being tortured. So there's no secret from them. However, that was a crime under international law, under domestic law, and under our Constitution about a sitting president, Obama. Now, Obama would have had no hesitation about, in fact, pardon me, let me correct that. Obama did indict, so he had no hesitation. He did indict Bradley Manning, now Chelsea Manning. for that as a source, like me, for putting that out, which of course was not just embarrassing to him, it was embarrassing because it was incriminating. If he'd been tried at the International Criminal Court, whose jurisdiction we don't recognize, in The Hague, the one that tried Saddam Hussein, he would have been found guilty. Okay, but Obama looked into indicting Julian Assange at that time, his Department of Justice, and over time considered they couldn't indict him because that was too blatant a violation of the First Amendment. It's very arguably, and I believe this I'm not a lawyer, I'm a defendant, but I was the first defendant to face these charges, and I've kept up with the law on that pretty well. I believe that my indictment and the others in that are unconstitutional under the First Amendment. Use of the Espionage Act against people who reveal information to the American public. But indicting a journalist is a step further against freedom of the press, and you really don't have much left if you can do that. So Obama Justice Department did not indict Assange, but and this was back in 2010. Now this is well under Obama. When Trump comes in, the ACLU predicted and others predicted he's going to indict journalists as well. And it'll be up to the Supreme Court to see whether can that be possibly constitutional? Well, he didn't care about that, obviously. Being constitutional was not his obsession, let's say. So he indicts Assange. But Assange is not an American. He's not in America. He's not Australian. He was in Britain. And the British had him in jail. That's another story. So Trump appealed for extradition on his last day in office, or what is generally regarded as his last day in office. Of course, he regards himself as still in office. But on the 19th of January, he appeals. Oh, the judge had refused extradition on health grounds, on grounds that our system of confinement, of solitary confinement, which would certainly be subjected to, as was Chelsea Manning and others, amounts to torture. And for Snowden's, I'm sorry, I'm missing here, but Assange's health, and having been in the Ecuadorian embassy for 7 years and now in solitary confinement in Britain, that his health and his mental health and physical health, according to many doctors in Britain, would be jeopardized by extraditing him. So she denied extradition, but Trump appealed. That's what he did on his last day. Biden could easily have dropped that appeal, just drop it. That's what he should do. That's what he should have done. That's what he should do tomorrow. But a Trump holdover in the Justice Department, before Merrick Garland had yet been confirmed, continued the appeal. Now, is Biden? There's a lot of people saying, drop it. Don't blatantly challenge the First Amendment by continuing this prosecution. We won't have much of a First Amendment left, and not many countries have them at all. But we still do. Britain doesn't, for example. We had a revolution. We have a First Amendment. So he should drop it. But going back to 2010, Joe Biden called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist. Now, that was absurd. But Biden, is in many ways, in domestic policy, is doing better than almost anyone expected. Foreign policy, not any better, no better than any of the others, which is terrible. But he's human. He has his blind spots at his best and his limitations, like every human. And he is against leaks, like every president we've had. So high-tech terrorist. I think Hillary Clinton at that time was talking about droning Assange. Or was that Snowden? I think it was Assange. Yes, she was Secretary of State at the time. Killing him by drone, as Obama did to an American citizen, Anwar al-Awlaki, without trial, without due process, without anyone. He put him on a murder list and murdered him. And a few weeks later, killed by drone Awlaki's 16-year-old son, also born in America, like Awlaki, an American citizen, killed for reasons we don't know yet. And I'm told just recently Trump killed his daughter as well. I didn't know he'd finished off the family, mafia style here. But in any case, murder is now part of the toolbox of an American president.
And unfortunately, that applies to Democrats and to Republicans.
Yes.
And the protection that they show to the U.S. military. So Obama, as we're aware, actually prosecuted more whistleblowers than any president before him. So yes. This idea that he was some great protector of the First Amendment falls short.
That is not. He had various virtues, but that was not among them.
Right. So he absolutely was not. So in many areas, as you were just giving credit to President Biden, in many areas, the first day he got there, the first week, the first month, he repealed a lot of the more egregious policies of the Trump administration. But you were saying that when it comes to the Assange case, that this was a holdover from the Trump Justice Department, that person continued with the request, the appeal for extradition.
He's
that
out
was
now.
Before Merrick. Yeah. So Merrick Garland is there now. And of course, we all know that President Biden has in 2010 called Assange a high-tech terrorist. But a hope, of course, is that people such as yourself and others are helping him to see the light on this case and to recognize that that is in fact not what Julian Assange is. But what I question is if in fact President Obama was willing to stop short of prosecution because he knew that it was such a full front attack on the First Amendment, why is it that President Biden wouldn't see this as a full frontal attack on the First Amendment as well?
If the public succeeds in pressing Congress to press the president on this point, to bring it to his attention, I think it would be hard for him to say, no, this is perfectly consistent with the First Amendment. You know, even under Obama, one doesn't know just how much the DOJ, the Department of Justice, is in full knowledge, operates with the detailed knowledge of the president. Don't know how much. After all, as you say, or as I said, the Obama Department of Justice did not indict Assange. What was Obama's personal attitude? We don't really know. I don't know that he commented on that. And we do know Biden was his vice president, but he wasn't in the Department of Justice. Hillary Clinton was his Secretary of State. There's no question Hillary Clinton was extremely embarrassed by what Chelsea Manning revealed on her watch, which included support of dictatorships and corrupt governments all over the place, including efforts to stop unionization in Haiti, for example. Not exactly. People said, well, Chelsea is not just revealing crimes by the U.S. To U.S. citizens. Some of it has to do with foreigners. Yes, Chelsea Manning did want to reveal what we do to foreigners, not just to American citizens.
And it's not just the president. It's not just the Secretary of State. It's not just the Department of Justice. The courts become involved here. Of course, in your case, it was famously the Supreme Court, which told the Washington Post that they could, in fact, publish the material. The concern, of course, today is that if anything regarding Julian Assange made it up to the Supreme Court, I think Julian Assange would really be in trouble because of how conservative the court is. So it seems that so many of the aspects of our government have been saturated by this mentality that military secrecy is somehow something we should support rather than recognizing what a danger, not just to the First Amendment, but that military secrecy in and of itself is so dangerous, particularly given that in your case and in Julian Assange's case, what we realize is that what was covered up was so horrifying. In your case, having to do with the decision-making and the lies about that decision-making regarding the Vietnam War, Cambodia, Laos, etc. And in Julian Assange, as you were saying, war crimes. Now, let me ask you this. Do you feel that there was somehow the appropriate outrage regarding the Pentagon Papers, that the American people, that at that time when we realized how Nixon had lied to us, that there were enough Americans who went, oh, that's not okay. Does it concern you, the relative complacency today compared to what was true in the 1970s? because what's being revealed today is it could be argued even worse.
Well, I think what's happening today is reveals something that was true earlier, but not as evident.
Yeah.
In the Vietnam War, while in the process of killing between 2 and 4 million Vietnamese, Indo-Chinese, as a result of a war that we had no right to be fighting, we also lost 58,000 Americans.
Yeah.
Now, in Iraq, let's say in Afghanistan, and Iraq together, you put them together, I think together they have lost less than 4,000, which is a 9/11 worth of military men, not civilians. We lost, I don't know, something like 2,500, I think, in Afghanistan. Well, it turns out the American people can put up with that pretty much. They don't pay that much attention to how many Indo-Chinese in the past got killed or how many Afghans killed. Have you ever seen an estimate
or Iraqis
of how many Afghans have actually been killed in the course of this war? Have you actually ever seen one? I haven't. We're not that curious about how many. Iraqis, there was a great range of estimates from Bush's 40,000 civilians way back then, which is 10 9/11s, but it's perhaps 1/20th of how many we actually killed, which go up to well over 1.5 million. The American public, again, isn't too curious about that, which is to say, our public, or a large part of it, if not all of it, is part of the problem. They really are willing to give the president great leeway in pursuing his own political prospects. In fact, in making it politically costly for him to be charged with losing a war or ending a war. By the way, I will give Biden credit. I didn't believe he'd come as close as he is doing to getting out of Afghanistan altogether. You notice that Trump wanted to do that and couldn't do it. The military kept him from doing it. Biden has done it. And that is not to say that only good is going to come out of that. There's going to be some bad spectacles. And yet, I do believe that after 20 years, the American people have let succession of presidents, kill Afghans and to some smaller degree be killed themselves. After 20 years of that, Biden is right in saying, that's enough. That's enough. We should be out. And the other problems have to be dealt with by means other than killing Afghans. I'll give you one example. I just read today that the program for getting visas for the thousands of Afghans who've worked for us as interpreters, as chauffeurs, as all kinds of operations with us, obviously they would be targeted by the Taliban. Later, they'd be in danger. We should give them visas, in fact. And I read today, it's stalled. Now, that shouldn't happen. There's a certain amount of honor, even among thieves, even among imperialists. And of course, we betrayed a lot of people who worked with us in Vietnam for years by not getting them out. And of course, we should get them out now. And for that matter, women in Kabul are going to be, if the Taliban does take over in 6 months, as is predicted, after 20 years of our spending many, many billions of dollars training an army, supporting it, training a government, bringing democracy to come. If they really fall to the Taliban in 6 months, yes, women in Kabul, mainly, they're in no good shape outside Kabul anyway, or Kandahar. People in universities should be allowed out of there, gotten out of there. Will we do that? Well, that remains to be seen. I tend to think that Biden will do that, but it takes public pressure. The public has to show that they care to that degree. And as I'm saying, protecting those women by bombing the rest of Afghanistan for another 20 years is not the answer, in my opinion.
And of course, when you're talking about women, which is, half the human population, when I think of, the Taliban has made some comments like, yeah, we were tougher on women than we needed to be, but my heart is actually broken for the women and girls of Afghanistan.
It's not clear that the status of women in the Taliban will be worse than it is under our occupation, and it was better under the Russian occupation also.
Well, it was definitely better under the Russian occupation.
That's what led to an insurgency. Yeah. Under the Russian occupation, the status of women was very much better, and that's why they had an insurgency to a large extent. The Russians cut down on the opium trade, heroin, much more than we did, and that roused an insurgency from the people who want, from the warlords, by the way, who grow the heroin, the opium, who don't do any better by women than the Taliban. And this is, I'm not bringing something out of left field here. The warlords have a real problem with young boys, with their treatment of young boys, not only women. And the fact is that the warlords who people turn to the Taliban to protect them from the warlords who will be there left. We've never really encouraged a genuinely democratic process in Afghanistan, lest it encourage people that we didn't want to get into power. But let's look at Saudi Arabia. How misogynist can you get? How sexist can you get? The murderer, Mohammed bin Salman of Khashoggi, was the leader who's toasted in all the capitals because he's very rich, controls the oil trade to a large extent. He's lauded very much for his modernity because he allowed women to drive. Right. That's not exactly, the furthest you can go in the 21st century here. And he doesn't go a whole lot further. Women being allowed to go out on their own, universities, read, write, all this. We could hardly be allied to a more misogynistic or sexist part of the free world, so-called, than Saudi Arabia. But we managed to do that. I am not suggesting we invade Saudi Arabia, but I am suggesting that we stop our occupation of Afghanistan and our reform there as foreigners coming in and basically occupying Afghanistan. Our reforms could not succeed because they could only unite a country that's united in almost no other characteristic other than expelling invaders, which they've done, and nobody's done that better in the modern history of the world. And the idea that Obama regarded that as a smart war compared to Iraq is just incomprehensible. There could hardly be a dumber war than trying to occupy a country that gave Alexander the worst trouble he had anywhere, Genghis Khan the worst trouble he had anywhere, expelled the Russians, expelled the British, and to think that he would do better. We could stay there another 20 years with our power, which these other people didn't have. We wouldn't be any closer to achieving reform in Afghanistan by our methods. They don't want invaders.
Well, it's like you said, that's the one thing they'll all come together and agree on is to get out the foreign invaders. How do you feel, going back to the Assange case now, are you hopeful? Do you feel that all of this public pressure being brought to bear on the case? Do you feel that one day we're going to wake up this week, next week, the week after, and the Biden administration will have chosen to drop their appeal for extradition?
I'm working on it with a lot of other people. I'm probably, Marianne, I don't know, you probably know Joanna Macy, or do you not?
Of course I do, yeah.
Very great mentor of mine. But she's always said, hope is not a belief or a feeling, it's a way of acting. And yes, a lot of us are, like you, are continuing to act as if Assange can get out of there. Now, actually, this one is more promising than most of the miracles I hope for. It won't even be this one isn't even in the miraculous place, like a lot of things other that I would like to see happen. He does have the British judge's opinion in his favor in this point. It is going up to a high court. They haven't set a date for it in the high court. And after the high court, conceivably, there is the House of Lords above that. He very well could win the support of that in the high court, but they haven't actually said when he's getting out. When they will take it up. And meanwhile, he's in what amounts to solitary confinement.
Yeah.
His judges have not seen him in person since February. His lawyers, His partner has not seen him, talks every day. His children have not seen him. And he's there in a maximum security jail for terrorists, by the way, which he's not. For Biden to have called him a terrorist is obscene. simply obscene. There's various ways of defining a terrorist, but actually telling the truth to the American people or to the world, informing them of truthful information is not terrorism.
No.
And you can say, well, it embarrasses us. That has bad problems. That has bad problems. Maybe the other people will get elected. That would be terrible for other people. Sorry, that's crazy.
That
So yeah. Anyway, yes, actually, he may well get out. I'm saying I had the pleasure of having a long evening here with his father and his half brother,
Gabriel and John.
we talked about this, and it's just, with Britain's desire to be close to the United States in all respects, and the clear U.S. process of wanting to get him back here to try him, you can't be sure he'll get out. But there is a good chance, and I think this publicity on the issue, a lot of people hate Julian Assange. He's a pariah. I do not. I'm a friend of Julian Assange. But I understand that a lot of people hate him. That has nothing to do with this issue, literally nothing to do. We're talking about what he did in 2010, not what he did in 2016, which happens to be much more controversial. What he did in 2010 with Chelsea Manning, which is all that he's charged for, was journalism in the best sense, in the best process. And to hold him guilty, prosecute him even for that, is pretty much to cancel out investigative journalism of what we call the national security system, which has little to do, a little of it has to do with national security.
National security,
most
exactly.
of it does not. And it needs a lot of investigation. It needs a lot of its secrets exposed. We need more whistleblowers rather than less. And if he is prosecuted and indicted over here, there will still be some whistleblowing by the kinds of heroes that we've seen. But they have to be heroes, and it'll have to be journalistic heroes too. And they exist. There will be journalists who will risk prison to get this out. But that's not enough, not what we need. So the First Amendment is worth preserving.
He has been made to suffer greatly already. For what you said was just what journalists are supposed to do. And I think one of the reasons he has been made to suffer so greatly is because the message is very loud to all journalists to back off, not to question the so-called national security state, not to question military secrecy, not to question the U.S. government. And of course, as we know, questioning the U.S. government is what patriotic Americans should be doing. And that's the job of all journalists. Well, I thank you so much, Daniel Ellsberg, for all that you have done, not only in the 1970s, what you've done since then, what you've done in this particular case. And thank you for the light that you've been shedding here in this conversation on Afghanistan and so many of the continuing policies of the United States military, bringing to light the fact that some things have to change in very fundamental ways. And I think what you were saying before was true. The American people have allowed ourselves to be distracted. I think a lot of the trouble that we are in today is because of collective complacency on the part of way too many Americans. It's not fun to look at what's happening to Julian Assange. It's certainly not fun to look at war crimes and what they mean about what America does, not only whether or not we should have gone to war, but how we were behaving once we did. But it's truth tellers like you who put the mirror to our face, who totally insist that we do look at those things. And I think you and I agree that the only hope we have is that we are willing to wake up, be brutally honest with ourselves, about ourselves, and make the changes that need to be made. So you are such a leader, sir, in every sense of the word. And I cannot thank you enough. I thank you for being on the podcast, but also I just thank you as an American for all that you have done and all that you're doing.
Thank you for raising these issues, and Marianne, and for being a voice for Julie, which I think, by the way, in this case, has a real chance of making a difference. So it's very important, and I thank you, just as you were a very good voice for issues in the presidential campaign that no one else would raise. So keep at it. Thank you.
Thank you. God bless you, sir. Thanks.